Hi everyone, welcome to the Leading Numeracy Orientation session. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we live and learn, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and thank them for taking care of this country over countless generations. My name is Numeracy Orientation. I'm an education consultant here in the wonderful state of Victoria. I am a former primary school principal and a former principal network chair as well. I have put my contact details on the screen there. I'm at RisAl on Twitter and Auslit Teacher on all the other pipes. And I've put my email address up there as well. I often get emails after the Bastow webinars. Just a reminder, I do not have an Edgemail account, and I do have a namesake at Bastow now. So there is another Narissa at Bastow, and she has received a few emails for me. So please use my Gmail account if you're looking to get in contact with me. Okay, so if you haven't joined us for a Bastow webinar before, this is how they work. We try not to, I try not to waffle on all night. I try and get you to pause and to think about some of the content. Really thinking about this quote, this is from Academic Conversations book, about that idea that by talking and sharing our thinking with others, that helps us to develop and to deepen our understanding of the topic. So in that vein, we have a Padlet address to use tonight. So Padlet is a back channel. So it's another site that you can use to contribute your thinking, your ideas, your resources, any links to resources that you might use. And it's a great way to share and to build community. So I would love you to introduce yourselves in the Padlet so we can see who we have online with us tonight. In the Padlet, we also have some of our wonderful Bastow staff answering any of your questions. So I look forward to seeing who's with us tonight. I have to do a couple of shout outs, one to Anne in Bendigo. She's staying the whole night and listening to me all night, she's promised. And also I see Tanya Franks. Hello, Tanya, need to catch up. So that's how it works. I'll present some of the information, and then we're going to pause and allow or look back through the questions and then respond to any questions or resources as need be. All right, the learning intentions for tonight. I just need to be really clear about this. We've had some questions. Some people think that they've come to this orientation session thinking that they're signing up to the Leading Mathematics program at Bastow. That's not actually what we're talking about tonight. Tonight we are doing an orientation to the numeracy suite that has just been rolled out or just been offered by Bastow. So you can see the learning intentions there. We are going to look at the current priorities in numeracy. We're going to look at the range of professional learning opportunities being provided by Bastow in the next in the upcoming next year and the year after. We will look at the role of the numeracy leader and discuss ways in which principals can assist and support the role of the numeracy leader in schools. And at the end, we're going to talk about planning for effective numeracy improvement and looking at some of the research around change leadership. Oh, that's my favourite part, but you'll have to wait until the end so that we can discuss that part. Oh, look, it's my friends from Glengala. How are you guys? All right, so the success criteria, you'll be able to identify the current state priorities in numeracy, list some of the numeracy-related PL opportunities by Bastow, discuss the role of the numeracy leader and talk about ways that they can be supported, and articulate some of the evidence-based strategies for leading effective change. So we are going to start by looking at the education state targets. Simon Sinek always says that we should start with why, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm hoping that this image is not new to you, where it is an image depicting what our education state targets are, what the goals are. We can see here that in the Learning for Life area, one of the targets is that more students will excel in reading and mathematics. And that's obviously the area that we're looking at tonight. But you could argue that the focus on numeracy affects other parts of our state target goals as well. So if you think about reducing the impact of disadvantage or developing critical and creative thinking skills. So we're not just focusing on that learning for life, it will impact other areas as well. So the actual targets, and they are ambitious, but that's what we need. We need to set ambitious targets. So by 2020, the target was at 25% more Year 5 students will reach the highest levels of achievement in reading and maths. And by 2025, 25% more Year 9 students will reach the highest levels of achievement in reading and maths. So, and it's probably pretty relevant to be talking about the targets now, since we've all just received our NAPLAN data, and we'll be able to update and see how we're progressing towards achieving these targets. Hello to the crew at Tooten. All right, so we've got, just having a reflection, these posted on the department website, and it was just a reflection on or the progress that we've made as a state. And this is actually using last year's NAPLAN data. I unfortunately didn't have access to this year's NAPLAN data, so I could update it. But you can see there on the left, maths for Year 5, our 2020 target is that 39.9% of students would be will reach the highest level of achievement. Our 2018 data says that 31.1%. So we've got a bit of work to do very quickly for the Year 5s. And for our Year 9s, our 2025 target is 32% or 32.6%. Our 2018 result was 27.2%. So although it looks like there's less work to do, I think the high school teachers in the session will agree with me that is going to be there's a lot of work to be done to reduce that number, or to increase the number from 27 to 32. So that's where we're sitting, or that's where we were sitting last year. You can see that we are on a journey, but it's good to have those ambitious targets. So speaking about the targets, recently read the Australian Education Leader Journal. This is produced by ACEL, and I saw an article in there by Jenny Atta, who's the Secretary of the Department, as you all know, and she wrote an article called Leading Through Vision and Voice. And in this article, she says, as you can see, I've put it on the screen there, in 2018, the results achieved for NAPLAN reading and numeracy are the best ever by Victorian students. The 2018 mean scores for numeracy were the highest recorded since NAPLAN commenced in 2008. So I'm really hoping that we can celebrate again with our 2019 data, and I do apologise that I don't have access to that just yet, very hot off the press. But I thought that's worth celebrating, that the last year's data. So we're on the right path. The other part of Jenny's article that I thought was really important is that she says there's still more work to be done. So yes, we can celebrate that we're making good progress, but of course there's more work to be done. And we saw that with the education state targets on the previous slide, to say, yep, we know where we're heading. So just in that vein, Jenny outline the fact that in the past, or up until now, we've been the state or the education department from the centre has been building and supporting schools through the provision of resources, etc. And the next part of the work is actually moving that work out into the middle. So building the capacity of regions, of network leaders, of principals, of leading teachers. And of course, the numeracy leader role is a part of that, building the capacity from the middle. So she says that building the capacity in the middle will be critical to sustaining and embedding the improvements to teaching that will improve student learning. And I want you to think about tonight that idea of sustaining and embedding. In everything that we're doing tonight, we've got to be thinking about sustaining and embedding the change. So it can't just be a really quick fix that drops away once we take the pressure off or once we stop focusing on it. We have to be thinking about sustained and embedded change. So to that end, how do we build the capacity of the middle? Well, that's Bastow's answer to that is that the new numeracy suite that they're offering. So and it forms part of phase 2 of the literacy and numeracy strategy, which I know everyone will have memorised. So I'm pleased that you've done that. We are going to watch a short video now of an introduction to the literacy and numeracy suite provided by Neil Barker and Lisa Black at Bastow. And I have just snipped out all of the literacy, so it's just focusing on the numeracy because that's what we're talking about tonight. So let's have a look at some of the offerings that are available through Bastow.
Hello, my name's Neil Barker. As we all know, literacy and numeracy are foundational skills for lifelong learning. Introduced in 2017, the Literacy and Numeracy Strategy set in motion a focused agenda to improve literacy and numeracy outcomes for all students. Bastow will continue to support schools to consolidate and embed the strategy through our literacy and numeracy suites. Both suites comprise evidence-informed and comprehensive professional learning, contextualised to ensure impact. This video is your entry point into Bastow's literacy and numeracy suites and their respective professional learning opportunities. I'd like to introduce Lisa Black, who has led this work on behalf of Bastow.
Bastow's literacy and numeracy professional learning going forward has something in it for everyone. And we're beginning with this video today to help principals get a better understanding of the new professional learning that's coming out. We know that you may be involved in other professional learning, in fact you are, through Mylan's work, learning specialists, PLCs and other initiatives. We strongly believe that Bastow's offerings are complementary to that work and will hold you in good stead going forward. As part of the Literacy and Numeracy Strategy launched in 2017, we led out with primary literacy and are now seeing the work coming through on the numeracy piece, which includes the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide, the Maths Curriculum Companion, the Maths Teaching Toolkit and the Secondary Literacy Toolkit, which is now available. Please check out the DET website for more information on these. We know every school is unique, but also a goodly proportion of you are pushing for the same end goal: exemplary literacy and numeracy teaching in every school in Victoria. Not everyone can get to North Melbourne. So with this in mind, we've designed a new literacy and numeracy professional learning using blended formats. That is face-to-face, online, in networks, in webinars and in North Melbourne to maximise the learning reach across Victoria, specifically designed with multiple audiences in mind. For the purpose of this video, I'll use the term numeracy leader to refer to anyone with leadership responsibilities in numeracy or mathematics. Firstly, the Numeracy webinar series, which you can access now, is aimed at classroom teachers and is focused on using the available resources, evidence and strategies to make connections and build capabilities to continue improving numeracy teaching. Head to our website for upcoming webinar dates. Also available are the Leading Numeracy Orientation webinars, which are split into two parts. The first webinar will be clarification for principals of the role of the numeracy leader and the conditions that will enable successful numeracy improvement. Webinars 2 and 3 will provide numeracy leaders with an understanding of how to apply the available tools and resources to enact numeracy improvement. Specifically designed for numeracy leaders, the Needs Analysis tool is a self-assessment that enables numeracy leaders to identify their strengths and areas for improvement. We anticipate that all numeracy leaders across Victoria will take advantage of this tool to help direct their professional learning pathways and our learning design here at Bastow. The webinar and Needs Analysis tool will inform the opportunities principals and numeracy leaders choose. These include Leading Mathematics, which has been offered by Bastow for several years, but has been significantly refreshed. It develops the capabilities of the school team to lead improvement in numeracy. The Leading Numeracy Masterclasses provides numeracy leaders with deep exploration of strategies and capabilities that support numeracy improvement. And we also have one-day numeracy leader area workshops, which further support numeracy leaders to lead improvement and provide networking opportunities. We also have online courses for numeracy leaders, which will focus on common areas identified through the Needs Analysis tool. System leaders will be offered professional learning in numeracy also. Head to Bastow's website at bastow.vic.edu.au for more information and to register for these upcoming opportunities. We're looking forward to seeing you all here at Bastow or somewhere out there in the regions for this fantastic professional learning, and we wish you well in all of your work. Thank you.
Okay, there's always a big finish to those videos, so I let it play right until the very end. Now, if you have any questions about the Bastow numeracy suite that Lisa just spoke about, then more than happy for you to put them in the chat. I've got the Bastow staff here answering questions tonight, and I'm just going to go through a couple of those because sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming to work out which ones should we enroll in, which ones should we do them all at once, should we put different staff in different courses. So let's go through and just add any of your questions to any, if you have any, put them in the chat there. So you can see there's the overview. So we're in the leading numeracy orientation now, so we can tick that one off, but there will be 2 more of those coming up. The numeracy webinar series, the leader needs analysis tool, the masterclass series, which has already started, the online numeracy courses, leading mathematics, and the numeracy leader area workshops. Okay, so the first one, obviously we're in this one now. This one tonight is we're talking directly to principals, but of course we've welcomed numeracy leaders into the room as well to share that conversation. Webinar 2 and Webinar 3 are aimed directly at numeracy leaders. So the dates for those are on the screen, November the 14th and November the 27th. And they will be held at the same time and in exactly the same format as we have now. So they get your names down for those. You can register for those with Bastow. The numeracy webinar series, this is the one that's already started. I said it was a masterclass, but it's actually the numeracy webinar series. So these are live streamed on YouTube in the exact same way that this session is. We have a Padlet, so we have people interacting, sharing resources, asking questions. We're as interactive as possible in these. We've had a really good response to these, and we've got lots of questions and lots of suggestions for further webinar series content. So if you've got any other suggestions, please send them in. These are recorded and accessible afterwards. And I will say that about the Padlet. So tonight's Padlet, that is also accessible after the session. So if someone shares a resource in there, you can always access it afterwards. The webinars themselves are recorded and people can access those afterwards. And which means that schools can watch it live, which is most beneficial because then you can use the Padlet and respond and ask questions. Or you can watch the recording, which many staff and many schools have been doing that as well, and we see that with our YouTube views. So with the webinar series, I just wanted to outline, so we have already had two of the 3 this year. The first one was on setting up the conditions for effective teaching and learning in numeracy, and in this we looked at growth mindsets in numeracy, we looked at student engagement, looked at anxiety around numeracy and the impacts of teacher anxiety in teaching numeracy, and I think that was a real eye-opener for the people who participated in that webinar, and something that has really got a lot of thinking and discussion happening in schools, and we looked at the research around that. And I also introduced the Birth to Level 10 Numeracy Guide that the department has recently released. So again, that one's available online. The second webinar, which we only held just recently, is we looked at the 4 maths proficiencies, explicit vocabulary instruction in mathematics, and learning intentions and success criteria specific to mathematics. So the next one we're going to look at is various forms of summative and formative assessment and the role of feedback. We might also have a bit of conversation around the role of talk, although we've got a talk-specific webinar planned for next year. So I do want to just show people how to access the recordings for those because I get a lot of questions around this. So there are 3 ways that you can access the recordings. One is that you can go to the Bastow website and you can look for on the numeracy suite on there, and you can get access to the previous recordings. The second one is that you can go to YouTube, you can type in Bastow Institute, and you can go to Bastow's own YouTube channel. Highly recommend this. If you click on the videos link on this channel, there are access to some really great professional learning opportunities. Obviously free, and you can watch those in your own time, but there's some really high quality stuff on there. So I do recommend going to have a look at that. And then the third one is because I have so many questions about it, I've put a link to the videos and the supporting resources that we send out with the webinars on my own website. So if you just go to numeracylearn.com, then you'll be able to access all of the previous webinar resources, the slides and the supporting resources packs on there. So 3 ways to access it, just to remind you. So the other part, or the next part of the numeracy suite that Lisa talked about was the leader needs analysis. This is designed to support numeracy leaders to work out their own areas of need and to really help them to focus on their own professional learning in the area of numeracy and leadership of numeracy within the school. So this is due out later this year. So I know it says from October 2019 there, but it will say later this year. And it'll be working the same way. If anyone can remember the old e-learning kind of tool that we used to use to help us to work out our own professional learning needs, it'll work in a similar way to that. So the Leading Numeracy Masterclass series, the Masterclass series, the content for the Masterclass series will come out of the needs analysis survey or needs analysis tool. So it'll be a deep dive into a specific area that is included in the needs analysis. And these will be online as well, either in the same format as this or in a virtual workshop format. So keep an eye out for those. They will start next year in term 1. So you'll be able to join up to those on the Bastow website. So this is something that I imagine that you could participate in as a staff, not necessarily, or you could do it individually, but you could also do it as a group, as we have many people in the numeracy webinars. We have lots of people attending as a school, so they can have that conversation and turn and talk and have those discussions. The online numeracy courses, these are more individual. So these are courses that will go for around 15 weeks, 15-ish, I'm going to say, weeks. And you can choose to do 1 or 5 of these, 1 or all of them. And they're sort of like an extended online course, sort of almost like an elective. So once you've done the needs analysis and you've identified a specific area of professional learning for yourself, then you could sign up to one of these online numeracy courses. So again, the focus for this will come out of the needs analysis tool. So these are due to be rolled out from term 2 of next year. So do keep an eye out on the Bastow website for these ones. Leading Mathematics, as Lisa said, this one's been offered at Bastow for quite a while now. So it's a similar course, although it'll be going to a blended learning model, which we are going to talk about in a minute. If you are not familiar with Leading Mathematics in the past, or Leading Numeracy as it was called in the earlier days, this is really about building the capacity of a school team, so a team of approximately 3 people from within the school, and one of those people is a member of the leadership team, building the capacity to lead and support whole school cultural change in mathematics and numeracy. So it's really about slowing down and looking at what's going on in your school and really understanding your current needs in the school, and then planning, effectively planning or strategically planning for that positive cultural change. So I've put the details up here. The course hasn't been completely finalised yet. There's a design summit, final design summit coming up, but 7 workshop days, so 7 face-to-face days, and one of those is actually an in-school day. And my own school, when I was a principal, my own school participated in this and found this highly valuable. We had people come and help us to look at what was happening in our own school for mathematics. So then there's the between work, so the in-school investigations. There's team meetings for the team to analyse the evidence and to really find out what's happening, and a choice of online electives. So that is different to how Leading Mathematics has been in the past. But that's how, moving forward, it'll be more accessible for those out in the regions. And finally, the Numeracy Leader Area Workshop. So if you're familiar with the Literacy Suite, you'll know that there are literacy area workshops. This is the same for numeracy leaders. So the idea for this is it's 1-day workshop in each area, so 1 day per year. And it's really an opportunity to network with other people who are in the numeracy leader role. So face-to-face in the local area, and hopefully building those networks so you can start to share. And as Jenny Addis said, go back to building that capacity from the middle so that it's sustained and embedded change. So look out for these. These will be running from next year as well. All right, I am going to give you some thinking time, some time to put some questions in the chat. So I'm just going to start my timer. questions or thoughts about the professional learning suite that is being offered by Bastow. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. So I think Sam's question there, she must be thinking about the master trainers. She must be thinking that Matt's is the same. Okay, thank you for those people who have been asking questions in the chat. We've got the Bastow team working on that now. We need to create some more work for them so they can earn their money tonight. All right, so interesting, I saw a question, I can't remember who it was from, about how is everyone fitting this in. Really good question. And that brings me to this equation. I made it an equation because it's a numeracy webinar, so I thought you guys would be totally all over this. Face-to-face plus online learning equals blended learning. So I want to talk about blended learning because there are a few misconceptions around this, and it speaks to that question that someone asked about where are we fitting this in. So face-to-face is exactly that. It is it's an offline environment. It's either at North Melbourne or out in the regions, as Lisa said in the video. The online learning is usually using Bastow's Canvas or Bastow 307. And usually that will include doing micro lessons or participating in tasks, doing readings, and then engaging in discussion forums. Or it might be a virtual workshop similar to what we're doing tonight. The third part of this, and it's not in the equation, is the applied learning. So sometimes when we have this concept of blended learning, it gets disconnected from real learning, and we forget that actually there's an application that's required. So in both the face-to-face and the online components of the work, there'll be applied learning, which means that we want you to go back into your school and put this on the ground and actually trial things and come back and discuss it and see how it's going. So that's the equation. That's what blended learning is. And we're moving towards more blended learning in Bastow because we know that it means that more people can access the courses. So let's have a look at some of the positives of blended learning. The first is that you get to work in your own time and your own space, and that is great. We know that people talk about anytime, anywhere learning. Well, that's what we're talking about especially when we're talking about the online component. Obviously, there's less travel time. That means more people can access it. It means that we're really living out our state's belief that every student in every single corner of the state deserves high quality teaching and learning. You are able to revisit the content and visit the content in your own time. And of course, it is more accessible. They're the positives, and I'm sure there are others. Maybe cheaper. You can probably come up with some of your own. We need to look at some of the challenges with online and fully online learning, or blended and fully online learning. The first is that you work in your own time and your own space. I know that was on the positives, but I see that also as a challenge. I have a lot of experience working in an online environment, and sometimes because people see online as working in your own time and your own space, it tends to encroach on our personal time, not our work time. So this is something that I really recommend. I'm speaking to the principals. We need to make considerations for this. We need to really think about, if I am enrolling my staff in an online course, then when am I expecting them to participate in this? When am I expecting them to put in the hours that are required to engage in this course? So I think that's a challenge that we need to think about in our system, especially when so many learning opportunities are now going into an online environment. We can't be expecting our staff to be engaging in all of these learning opportunities in their outside of work, fully in their outside of work hours. That's a challenge for us, and it's a challenge for the system. Also, the other challenge is that there's less or no face-to-face opportunities to network with others. So I know myself, when I was first starting out as a graduate, and I loved technology, and there wasn't anyone else in my school who loved technology, I had to go online to try and find like-minded people. And that could be the case for some of the people, especially out in regional and rural areas where we don't always have the ability to just drive to the next school and network and talk about, effective numeracy instruction. So that can be one of the challenges as well, although you can still develop some really strong relationships and friendships online, friendships, I might say, maths-related friendships. Let's clarify that. This is going really downhill quickly. So just thinking about what might that mean for the numeracy leader in my school. So if they don't get that opportunity to go and network face-to-face, how am I able to support them to build those networks that we know, if go back to Jenny Yatta, sustained and embedded. If we want that change sustained and embedded, then that numeracy leader needs to feel supported. So they're just some of the challenges. Oh, the final one I've just added there is the misconception about the rigor of the work. I think, and I see it over and over in online learning, people think that because it's online, it's a lot easier, or it's less rigorous. Bastow's course design is a really rigorous design, and it's rigorous for the offline courses, and it's just as rigorous for the online courses. So in fact, the online courses there's a lot of time. There's a big time commitment for those, and they're just as rigorous as the offline courses. So we really need to treat it in the same way we would if it were an offline or a face-to-face course. Another challenge is that it requires a lot of self-direction and self-motivation. That's a challenge if you're like me and you get a little bit distracted with the other tabs at the top of your browser, and next thing you're on your Twitter feed. So let's think about some ways that we can support. So if the leadership team in a school, how can you support the numeracy leaders or the staff in your school who are engaging in numeracy learning that's in an online environment? Firstly, staff need time to complete the online tasks, and I think we need to start thinking about maybe we can use our PDP days for this. That's just one option. Virtual workshops need to be valued. If there's a virtual workshop as a part of the course, it's a critical component. It's not kind of like just a nice add-on, be good if you were there, but oh well if you're not. Every element of the course is an essential element. So if we have our staff members are enrolled and they've got a virtual workshop on a certain date, then we need to value that. We can't schedule other meetings or require them to be in other places. We need to treat it in the exact same way we would if it were a face-to-face opportunity. Learning should be shared through regular discussion. I've put this on here because I recently participated in the content refresh for the Leading Excellence for the Learning Specialist course at Bastow, and it was really interesting to see the relationship between those learning specialists who struggled to feel supported at school. So staff members who felt that their leadership team had been great in signing them up for the course, but they hadn't engaged in those ongoing conversations. Just how's the course going? How can I help you with the course? Or, how's the learning being applied? How can we help you to apply it? That type of thing. So they felt that they were signed up to it and then felt really isolated through the course. And so there was a strong relationship between those people who didn't have those ongoing conversations and the people who, didn't feel value in the course. So those people who had really strong leadership, who kept checking in to see how the course was going and how it applied, really got a great value out of the course. So that's something to think about. Signing up is not the hardest part of the course. It's actually all of the work that comes afterwards. So I'm keen to hear what other implications you think, or what other ways we can support staff members who are engaging in blended learning. It'd be good to share your thinking in the Padlet there. So it is a big investment of time, so we need to value that and make sure that we're getting the most out of it. Okay, let's turn our attention to how else can we support our numeracy leaders. What is the role of the numeracy leader? I've put this, I feel like there's some unwritten mandate that I need to put a corny maths cartoon in every webinar that I do. So this is tonight's webinar. This is tonight's cartoon. Hopefully you can appreciate it. All right, so we're going to look at clarifying the role of the numeracy leader. I've just been appointed to the role of numeracy leader. What is it and what am I supposed to do? So for this, I am going to draw your attention to a booklet that was sent out to schools a while ago now. It's probably got a bit of dust on it. It may not be at the top of your resource pile. So I'm encouraging you to go searching through your office and pull out this document. Fortunately for you, I've just pulled out the part that we need to look at tonight, so you will have received that in the supporting resources pack. So what I want you to do is in here, and it actually has got some really useful actions and suggestions in here for leading the change in numeracy in your school. So I do recommend either, if it's a lost cause and you can't find it, you can easily Google it. There's a downloadable PDF version available. So what I want you to do is I want you to read through key action number 2 in here, and that's about selecting numeracy and literacy leaders. And I want you to read across. They've used the FISO improvement cycle, and this is aimed at principals and letting you know how you can support numeracy through the school, through the selection of a numeracy leader. But I want you to think about, as you read through to see what the numeracy leader is expected to do, or it's suggested that they will be involved in. And I want you to think about, if this is what this guide is suggesting the numeracy leader should be involved in or engaged in, their work, what do they need to do, know, and be to be able to do that, to be successful in that? So what are the skills, what are the attributes, what are the dispositions that the numeracy leader needs to have to be able to be successful in achieving all of those actions in key action 2. So in the numeracy pack that was sent out to you prior to this webinar, you will see there's an A4 sheet with the key actions, and on the right hand side, or the second page, there's a table with do, know, and be. And I just want you to record some of the things that your numeracy leader will need to do, know, and be to be successful in that. And I'd also love you to share your thinking in the chat around this. So I'm going to set the timer for 4 minutes. So it'll be a quick read, but we'll come back and we'll talk about the implications. Okay, I'm sorry to cut your time short. I'm hoping that you've been able to have a good look at that key action too. As you can see in there, and I'm looking forward to people posting in the chat their thoughts about what are the skills, the knowledge and the dispositions that our numeracy leaders need to be successful in this. It's a big ask. When you look at this and you look at the types of work that this guide is suggesting the numeracy leaders are engaged in, there's a lot of things that we need to help our numeracy leaders build capacity in. So these are some of the suggestions that I came up with. So they need to be data literate. So if we're asking them to evaluate the current practice, then they need to have data literacy skills. They also need to be familiar with the range of data sets that schools have available to them. They need collaboration skills in collaboration, and especially when we're talking about our numeracy leaders in secondaries where they're being asked to work across KLAs, so understanding the different needs of different teachers. Also, they're expected to work with the leadership team and teachers as well, so how do we collaborate with those two different groups of people? Instructional leadership skills, confidence and skills to work with peers. So some of that might include modelling. Shouldn't always include modelling, and there's some limitations to modelling. But do they have that confidence in upskilling their peers? Sometimes our numeracy leaders are people who have excellent or outstanding practice in their own classroom, but not a whole lot of experience with bringing other people on board to implement that same type of high quality practice. So that's a different skill set. Being amazing in your own classroom is one skill, but being able to bring other people on board to be also amazing is another skill. And that's something that we have to build their capacity and support them to develop that capacity. Strategic planning and monitoring of professional learning. Strategic planning, I think that is a lifelong endeavour. We are constantly, as principals, we are constantly working on our ability to plan strategically and always with that thinking of embedding and sustaining the change. So there's another skill set. Ability to work within and across disciplines. So there's a lot of knowledge that's required if you're going to work across disciplines. All of a sudden, your job is going to be trying to convince other discipline areas that maybe they could include a little bit of numeracy learning in what they're doing. I know that working with the literacy leaders in secondary schools, that's been a challenge, trying to get literacy spread across the other disciplines. So numeracy, you'll be in the same boat. And the final point I've put here, that idea of deep pedagogical content knowledge. And I'm going to have a look at that because I think this is where we really need to focus. As a leadership team, we've got to get our head around this deep pedagogical content knowledge. What does it look like, and who in our staff has this, and how can we build this in our staff members? So this comes from the work of Schulman way back in the 80s. He came up with the idea that there are different sets of knowledge. So we've got the pedagogical knowledge. So at the moment, we're talking about the resources that have been sent out from the centre. Let's talk about HITS, the high impact teaching strategies. Yes, I know that setting goals, I know how to give feedback, I know how to do multiple exposures, structure lessons, all of those types of things. That's my pedagogical knowledge. I know how, let's have a look, I teach children, and I'm good at teaching. So that's the pedagogical knowledge. The other set of knowledge is the content knowledge. And I know when I was in my own school, when we were looking at improving the maths, we worked out that our staff were really low in confidence in their content knowledge of mathematics. And this seems to be really specific to mathematics, or really common to mathematics, that idea of that content knowledge and not being confident or competent in that content knowledge. So content knowledge is the what of maths. This is that I understand the connections between the different topics, that I understand the how and the why of this topic that we're about to introduce to the students, that type of thing. So this is I teach mathematics. But the part that Schulman says is that we need to focus on is this part in the middle, the sweet spot in the middle where these two things overlap. That's the pedagogical content knowledge. So this is I teach children mathematics. So this is the difference between, I know the topic of fractions, so that's the content knowledge, I know how to teach. I know structuring lessons, multiple exposures, but in the middle, I understand and I know that these are some of the misconceptions that children are likely to have when I'm teaching fractions, and here are some of the ways that I know that I can teach to undo those misconceptions or to get around those misconceptions. That's that pedagogical content knowledge. So I hope you can understand that idea in the middle. If you are if you're technology inclined, you'll know that this model was then was later adapted into the TPAC model, technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge. So they added another circle at the top with technology knowledge as well. So I find this model to be really useful when thinking about building staff capacity and assessing and evaluating current practice in your school. So who in your school has deep pedagogical knowledge? Who in your school has deep mathematical content knowledge? And who has the sweet spot in the middle? Hopefully that's your numeracy leader. So just keep this idea of pedagogical content knowledge in mind. So on that, the research around this says that there are significant numbers of Australian primary teachers who would benefit from professional learning in that pedagogical content knowledge. And at a guess, I would say they've mentioned primary leaders or primary teachers specifically, because often we're generalists. We haven't gone into extra study in the field of mathematics. So we often need that extra support to build that pedagogical content knowledge. Secondary leaders or secondary teachers aren't off the hook either. The research says content knowledge alone is insufficient for effective teaching of secondary school mathematics. And we've seen this, we may have experienced this ourselves, where we may have had a secondary teacher who has really strong content knowledge, but hasn't had that really effective pedagogical knowledge to mix with that to make that maths accessible to us as students. So we've got to be aiming for that pedagogical content knowledge in the middle. It's not just about building up content knowledge and then all will be fixed. So if we go back here, it's a big ask, and I see some of you have contributed some of the ideas in the chat. So our numeracy leaders do need that idea of change management strategies. Thank you, Samantha. We're going to talk a bit about change management, or change leadership, I like to call it, in the last little snippet of tonight. So let's keep moving on from there. Thinking about, okay, so now that we know our numeracy leaders need all of these skills, they need this understanding, they need these dispositions. And if you're not familiar with that concept of dispositions, the first numeracy webinar we talked about growth mindsets and that maths anxiety. It might be worth going back and having a listen to that. So if we know that our numeracy leaders need all of these skills and knowledge and dispositions, then what can we as a leadership team do to support them to build their skills in those areas? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes just to think about that. And we've talked about the Bastow numeracy suite, so that might be one option for what you can do to support them. But let's have a think about what else you can do to help your numeracy leaders support to achieve success in all of those areas. So I'm going to put the timer on for 3 minutes, and I look forward to seeing your contributions in the chat. Okay, thank you for your contributions in the chat there. You can see we need to do a lot more thinking around this support. I think too often we sort of think, oh, we'll just sign them up to Bastow courses and that'll be it. Now I can take my hands off and everything will be fixed. There's a lot of work that signing them up is just the very first step. It is, and really, and I see David's mentioned mentoring there, the leadership team, we need to take on that mentoring role to help the numeracy leader build their skills in change leadership. And in leading that effective, that embedded and sustained change of numeracy across the schools. So I think we need to do some more thinking around how we can continue to support our numeracy leaders, but it is something to think about. This quote comes to mind. This is one of my mantras. I was introduced to this years ago when I did the one of the leadership courses in the early days. This is from Richard Elmore, his theory of reciprocity, and I pull this out as often as I can. He says, for every unit of performance I demand of you, I have a reciprocal responsibility to provide you with a unit of capacity. So he's talking to the leadership teams in schools and saying, well, when this was first introduced to me, it was paraphrased as, for every unit of change I expect, I need to deliver 1 unit of support. So if I want my numeracy leader to, if I demand the performance that I demand them to, or I want them to lead effective change, then I have to provide them with the support that they need to be able to lead that change. So Richard Elmore says that some people are a bit, they think this is a bit confrontational. He says that sometimes this forces us to acknowledge the level of underinvestment that we've made in the development of capacity to do the work that we're asking people to do. So I think this, for me, I've always used this to think, well, if I put someone in a role and I'm expecting them to do X, in a maths webinar, I'll use X, then and they're not, they're not achieving that, then my first step, rather than to say, well, they need to do this, this, and this, is to reflect on my own leadership and my own support and mentoring of that person to say, well, what can I do that can help, or what have I done to support that person to achieve whatever it is I've asked them to do. So just keep this one in mind when we're thinking about our numeracy leaders. What is the support that we are building, or what's the unit of capacity that we are delivering to that numeracy leader? We can't leave them off, because numeracy especially can be a very lonely field. So we can't just think that they're going to develop without that gradual release of responsibility. We know that about good teaching. It's exactly the same with our numeracy leaders. Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes just of thinking time. We've looked at the professional learning opportunities offered by Bastow. We've looked at the state priorities. We've looked at the role of the numeracy leader and how to support them. The final section that we're going to talk about tonight is the research around leading effective change. This is the stuff that I just love. Could talk about this all of the time. So just if you've got any questions, I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to reflect, and then we're going to move on to talking about leading effective change. Okay, thank you. See a couple of people have been posting in the chat. David asked a question about how do you get whole school buy-in. I would love to sell a product that immediately got whole school buy-in. I'm still working on it, David. You need to start with why, and Simon Sinek has a brilliant TED talk on exactly that. Start with why. If the staff don't understand the why behind this whole numeracy change, then they might come on board, but it won't be sustained and embedded. It'll be a short term, okay, well, I'll do it because you've asked me to do it, but it won't be sustained and embedded. So we have to understand why. Why this change? Why these kids? Why now? So we've got to really think about why, which will then inform your vision. And once you've got that vision and we're communicating the vision, then that also helps. But we have to be really clear on why. So I do recommend you watch that video. He also has a book, but it's all in the video. All right, so we're going to talk about, and hopefully some of this will help you, David, with your query, planning for effective numeracy improvement. So leadership is the difference between pockets of improvement in a school and whole school improvement. And we talked about this before, about that idea of I can be amazing in my own classroom, but we need that to be the consistent experience of every student in every classroom. And leadership is the difference between those two things. So how do we lead the effective change? I draw your attention to this article by Vic Zabar. It's in the Centre for Strategic Education. They put out a journal regularly. And this one, it's from 2016. The title of it is We Need to Talk About Change, No Prescription Without Diagnosis. And I have to say, working in so many schools and seeing so many different versions of change leadership, this is the number one thing that we get wrong in schools. So leading effective change, in this article, which if you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend it. He talks in here about that idea of, he talks about his own cancer journey, and he says about the fact that, the doctors actually have to work out they know he has cancer, but they have to work out what type of cancer, so then they can use the appropriate treatment for that specific type of cancer. They don't have a one size fits all, go to the chemist and get this one pill and it fixes all types of cancer. And he says that we need to do that in schools. We need to work out what are our symptoms, what's happening in our schools, so that so we're diagnosing what's going on before we're prescribing a solution. If schools really adopted this view that Vic Zabar has about leading effective change, it would stop us from solution shopping. We would not be saying, well, that school next to ours is doing this maths program, so we'll do that and our data will improve, because we don't know what they're taking that medication for. Their symptoms could be completely different to our symptoms. So he talks about that idea that low test scores and low growth, so, let's talk about the recent NAPLAN data, they're not the problem. They're just symptoms of the problem. And our job, or the job of numeracy leaders and of school leadership, is to work out what are our other symptoms? What's currently happening in our school? So let's diagnose that before we go prescribing medication. And I must say, when my school participated in the Leading Maths program, or Leading Numeracy as it was back then, that really helped us to diagnose the symptoms of our school. So at the end of the course, they didn't provide the solutions for us, but at the end of the course, we had a really clear understanding of exactly what our symptoms were, so that we could go out and start to look for some solutions or some medications maybe that would help to improve those symptoms. So when people came to us and they said, try this program, our questions were, well, these are our symptoms. Is it going to help with those symptoms? No? Well, we're not interested. So and our symptoms were that we didn't have deep content knowledge or deep pedagogical content knowledge. So it didn't matter which program we purchased, if we didn't build that, then it wasn't going to matter nothing would change in our data, and our staff beliefs around teaching numeracy wouldn't change. So I've really got to think about what are the symptoms in your school, and how do you work out what the symptoms are in your school? And that really takes us to the FISO improvement cycle. So those people who if you attended the first numeracy webinar, you will have, I showed this in the first numeracy webinar, because it's something I'm really passionate about it, because it's the thing we get wrong the most in schools. If we invest our time in this first phase of the FISO improvement cycle, it'll make the rest of the work so much more effective. But we do it out of a good place. We really want to change lots of things and change them quickly. So we kind of skip over these first few bits and we rush straight to implementing and monitoring, or just implementing at worst case scenario. We've got to pull ourselves back. We have to slow down to speed up. So we need to stop here before we launch into solutions and actions and really work out what is current practice. I will say this, for numeracy leaders, this can be tricky because sometimes as a numeracy leader, you don't get to see what other people are doing in their classroom. And we can fall into the trap of assuming that how I teach numeracy in my classroom is the same way that everyone else is doing it. And everyone else has the same knowledge as me, the same content knowledge, the same pedagogical knowledge, but that's not always the case. So we have to be really careful not to make assumptions here. This is where we need to get out of the classroom and find out. So this is about listening, 2 ears. We only have one mouth, 2 ears, just listening and finding out what's going on in other classrooms. So we need here to be thinking about who are our students as mathematicians? What do they know? What can they currently do? Let's start with an admiring lens. What are the strengths of our current numeracy program and the culture in our school around numeracy? What are the beliefs, the attitudes, the mindsets? That goes back to that first numeracy webinar that we talked about. What are our students' experiences with the numeracy instruction they've received up until now and now? And how do we know this? What's the evidence for this? So we've got to slow down and investigate current practice here. This quote, I shared this with it. So the next 3 slides I shared with the numeracy, I shared at the webinar, the numeracy webinar. So apologies if you've seen these 3 slides, but I think we have to be, this is something that we've got to be sharing with our schools and taking back to our leadership teams. Evidence isn't just a number, particularly when it comes to numeracy. Evidence of learning is much more than just student test scores. It includes what a student can write, make, do, and say, as well as what they can't. Teachers can collect this evidence in many different ways. They can do so formally through standardised assessments, we're good at those, traditional teacher set tests, or performance assessments such as essays or projects. Or they can do so informally through interactions with students and by observing their behaviour in class, for example. Different types of evidence are necessary to build a complete picture of each student's learning. And I'll argue different types of evidence are necessary to build a complete picture of what is happening in your school in terms of numeracy teaching and learning right now. We can't just rely on formally collected data. We have to swing into informally collected data as well. So some suggestions for evidence, and I would like you guys to add some ideas in the chat around this. Student surveys, talked about this in the numeracy webinar. This is something my own school did, and before I go and consult in schools, I will always have schools do this before I get there. This gives you really strong data about what is happening in your school currently. I use this for writing and reading as well as numeracy. Student survey questions, I've got some examples on the next slide that I'll share with you. The students are always really honest and in some cases brutally honest, but we as a school, when we were reflecting on our student survey data, the responses, this was probably the most useful data that we ended up using to help change the numeracy culture in our school. Student interviews are also really useful. So this doesn't mean you need to interview every single student in the school, of course. So we interviewed a small sample of students from each class and asked them questions like, what do good mathematicians do? Or bring an artifact that makes you think of good maths work, or bring something that you're proud of in maths. Just like the survey questions, these can be brutal. The data that we received and the evidence that we received from students in this was certainly a very cold blanket for us. It was, whoa, loud and clear, the message from our kids was, good mathematicians finish the worksheet and they finish it fast. There was nothing about, we wanted all our kids to have all these dispositions. We wanted the growth mindset. We wanted collaboration and all of this and persistence. And our kids were telling us maths is simply about worksheets and doing them fast. So that was a real eye-opener for us. And it was when you're talking, David asking about how to get people on board, that was our get people on board moment when we presented that data to staff and we sat there in that uncomfortableness of what our kids, our customers were saying to us. That was when really the turning point for our staff to say, well, we've got to change what we're doing here because that is not what our intention was. We didn't realise the way that we were teaching was creating students who thought maths was all about worksheets and doing things fast. So the other one, maths biography, is getting students, very useful for high school students particularly, getting students to write a short biography of their life in terms of mathematics. So what was your experience of maths in primary school? What were your strengths? What did you like? What didn't you like? What's been your experience up until now? Really useful to learn about students' beliefs around themselves as mathematicians, but also helpful for teachers understanding some of the anxieties that students might bring to mathematics. Classroom observations, obviously, they're going to help us to understand more about the student experience in numeracy in our school. Feedback analysis, so that is, can we go through and collect some of our student workbooks and let's look at some of the written feedback these kids are receiving. Are they receiving any written feedback? And if they are, what's the message that it's sending? Is it reinforcing that fast and first finishes message or, worksheet message? Or is it contributing or taking away from a growth mindset? So just an analysis of what's the written feedback, and in classroom observations, what's the verbal feedback? What are the signs? What are the things that we're doing without even knowing it that might be reinforcing some of these misconceptions or negative mindsets around mathematics? Task analysis is, let's have a look at some of the tasks that we've asked our students to do in the last week, and let's talk around what, if our students completed the task exactly as we asked them to, what would they have been able to do, know, and be by the end of it? And when we looked at that task analysis, often when we look back and we reflect on it, the task that we've asked them to do is really about just finish that sheet or just finish every second question. Did I really build the skills and knowledge and dispositions that I was aiming to in that lesson? Photos, this is useful for if you look at mini lessons. So if you say, yes, this is our instructional model, let's go and take some photos of the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the lesson, 15 minutes into the lesson of each year level, and let's lay them out and see what's the message or what's the journey for our students through the year levels in the mini lesson. So are we using manipulatives? Are we engaged in dialogue? What do the photos tell us about that journey? And do we want more consistency with what's happening in those in the mini lesson, for example? The classroom environment, this is probably more primary specific. What do our walls say about how much we value numeracy in our school? So I'm sure we've got our literacy walls, we've got our word walls, all of those types of things. Do we value numeracy in the same way that we might hopefully value literacy? What are our walls saying? What's our hallway saying? What's our common meeting space saying? What's our staff room saying about how much we value numeracy in our school? Same for the newsletter, assembly, all of those types of things. The final one that I've put on there is timetables. It seems so simple, but I do recommend that when you're evaluating current practice, let's look at the timetable and see, in theory, how much time are we allocating to teaching mathematics each week? And then at the end of the week, when we reflect back, how much time did we actually spend teaching mathematics? Because of that low teacher confidence and competence in teaching mathematics, it can slide off the agenda. So even though we had it penciled in 5 days a week for 1 hour, say in a primary school, at the end of the week, when we look back, that lesson, that only went for 30 minutes. That one only went for 20 minutes. We didn't actually get to Wednesdays. So let's have a reflection to see how much time are we allocating to teaching mathematics in our school And is that enough time for our students to engage in the types of learning that we want them to be engaged in? So I'm interested in your thinking around what other ways that you might gather data and evidence. This is absolutely not a comprehensive list. This is just the start of some of the evidence. Of course, I haven't included the summative data on there. Of course, we're going to be looking at that as well. So these, just for your own reference, some of the questions that I would ask on a student survey. What do good mathematicians do? Oh, ouch for us when our students answered that one. Absolutely wasn't what we were hoping that they would answer. But it all forms really, really strong pre-data. So we had some, we had a really good lot of pre-data that the teachers were then invested to say, we really want to change that. We don't want our kids saying that worksheets are mathematics. We want our kids saying that problem solving and making sense of the world, that's what mathematics is about. So that sort of helped us to form our vision of what we wanted to achieve. And then the great thing is we can do a post-survey. So we're 12 months into our change effort. Let's go back and redo that survey and let's have a look if we've made any change. And then we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate that our students we're not expecting to change everything in 12 months. There's no way that's going to happen. It's a journey. So what have we changed? What's the progress that we've made? Let's celebrate that. So some of the other questions, what's something you're good at? Can our students even identify anything that they're good at in mathematics? That question sometimes can link back to the feedback that they're receiving and whether they're receiving an admiring lens feedback. So that's an interesting one to ask. When do you think you'll use maths in your life? Very good question for high school students. If we can't see the point of this, why are we even bothering? And I think reading a few of the recent articles in the in all the media about the Year 9 NAPLAN, this is probably a really pertinent question. What would you like to change about your maths lessons? And another one that I do ask there is, what does your daily maths lesson look like? I want to know if we've got an instructional model that says we do this, then we do this, then we do this, is that being implemented in the school? So when I ask students that question, that helps us to see what's the consistency in implementation of that agreed model that we've had. All right, so there's just some of the questions that you might ask on a student survey. I think I always administer this using Google Forms because then, it collates the data for you and it would be a lot of work to do this by hand or on paper, but that's just me. I'm a Google girl. So we've looked at all the student side of things. Now we've got to turn our attention to staff. And we talked about that idea of deep pedagogical content knowledge. So we need to, as numeracy leadership team, we need to ascertain our teacher competence and confidence in teaching numeracy. So what are the levels of competence and confidence in teaching numeracy? And so we can take that into consideration to see if that might be an area that we need to work on. So this is one example of a way that you can get that information. One of the earlier schools that I worked in, the principal gave us this and we had to fill it out, and then we had a discussion with him about around this. And we did this for numeracy and for literacy. So top left, what's something that you're not good at teaching but you do enjoy teaching in mathematics? What's something that you're good at teaching and you enjoy teaching in mathematics? And then what are you not good at teaching and you don't enjoy? And what are you good at teaching but you don't enjoy? Try and say that really quickly 5 times, everyone. So this just opened up discussion for us. And as a numeracy team, we're thinking about, it's good leadership or good teaching is about knowing your learners. Same for leadership. We need to know who our teachers are and what are their strengths and what are their areas for improvement. What are the areas that we can support them in? And what are the areas that we can leverage off them? So if they're really good at teaching something, a particular area, and they feel really confident, maybe we can use them to do the modelling. Doesn't always need to be the numeracy leader. So let's use the knowledge within the school. So this is just one suggestion for how to do this. Teacher survey questions. I recommend a survey as well, and I had a few people email me after one of the numeracy webinars around this. So just some suggested questions. Obviously, you can come up with your own. How confident are you? What has been your own journey as a math leader? This can help you to learn a little bit about possible anxieties around teaching numeracy. How has your own journey influenced your current approach? So maybe you've followed if you've had a really terrific experience with having a numeracy teacher in your own life, then maybe you've followed that person, or, perhaps the reverse is true, unfortunately. In which areas of numeracy teaching would you like further support? And the last one's an interesting one, and this sort of goes back to that question that David asked earlier, how do you get buy-in? What area of numeracy teaching and learning do you think we need to work on as a school? This will help you to see who's on board with you right from the get-go, and you might be able to use these people in helping to lead the change. And it just helps you to see what are people's different priorities or their thoughts around what should be a priority in the school. So it's quite useful, that one, I think. So you can see there's a lot of work there, and we can't rush that work because that's the important work. And if that goes back to that idea of sort of ready, aim, fire, rather than ready, fire, aim, which is what we do in schools all the time. And we're wasting our time because we then have to go back and reload and reload and reload. So we're going to slow down and we're going to speed up. So we're going to slow down, work out exactly what the symptoms are in our school, and then we're going to start moving forward from there. We're not going to start buying programs or, looking for solutions. We're going to work out what's going on. So the next part is about prioritizing. Now I'm going to share 3 of my favorite quotes for this. I wish we could plaster these 3 quotes all over the school grounds, all in every school, in every leadership office, in every central and regional leadership office. Let's have a look. So the first one comes from Payne in a book called So Much Reform, So Little Change. He says, the primary reason for the general failure of 3+ decades of reform is our addiction to excess. Does this sound familiar? Because schools typically launch too many initiatives, none of them are implemented with adequate depth and intensity. This is death to successful execution. It is also death to embedding and sustaining change that Jenny Adder talked about. So our addiction to excess. This is so true in schools. We think if we add more and more priorities on top of each other, we're going to do all of them well. We know, we don't even need research to tell us, we just know from our own experience that doing less means we can do it better. But we've got to really believe in that. Fortunately, our school strategic plans are starting to reflect this and the research around this. So we're starting to be forced to have less focus points in there, less actions, which is so pleasing. But we've really got to say, what are the priorities? And let's do less and do it well. The second is a quote around focus. This comes from Mike Schmoker's book. He has a couple of books on focus. One is Focus, Elevating the Essentials, and the second is Leading for Focus. 2 really great books. The second one is more about leadership, and it's a very skinny read. You can put it on your bedside table and read it right before bed. He says, and he was talking about Jim Collins' work, Good to Great. He says, to succeed, leaders must carefully select, severely limit, and then persistently clarify the work to be done by those they lead. So we've got to carefully select, severely limit, and persistently clarify. They must also reject anything that distracts them from the focus. In short, they must embrace simplicity. That's hard. That's the hard work there, is rejecting all of the other things, because there are a lot of shiny, a lot of exciting, a lot of great opportunities, but we have to stay the course with the thing that we're focusing on. Applied simplicity defines and clarifies precisely what leaders and employees need to focus on, and what they must be given explicit permission to ignore. That's the tricky part. And it's certainly tricky when you have parents and community members saying, oh, but it'd be great if we got involved in this, and can we do this program as well, and can we go and do this as well? And we have to do less and do it well and really believe in that. So we're giving ourselves permission to ignore the things that are going to distract us from the main game. Don't you think that needs to be in every staff room? All right, last one is, I'm going to give you a little bit of it. Get comfortable. I'm going to read to you a little bit of this book. This is leading change in your school. It's by Douglas Reeves, who I continually call Richard Reeves, but that's a completely different person, and I don't even think he writes books about education. So this is Douglas Reeves. The first chapter of his book, as you can see there, is called Pull the Weeds Before You Plant the Flowers. I'm just going to read a snippet from this chapter. This chapter, the whole first chapter, is available free online, so you can go to the ASCD website, and I'm sure once I've read it, you'll be heading over there. Obviously, don't do it until after the webinar. All right, get comfortable, everyone. Imagine a gardener who sees row upon row of beautiful flowers in the nursery. He enthusiastically loads a basket to overflowing with annuals and perennials in anticipation of placing each new plant in a special place in the garden. The nursery salesperson is encouraging, explaining that these flowers are special hybrid varieties that research has shown will do well in the local climate. But on arriving home, the gardener faces an unpleasant reality. His garden is full of thistles, crabgrass, dandelions, and other weeds. Here are some choices the gardener might consider. Now think about you and your school. So choice number 1, drop the new plants at the threshold of the garden and leave them there, hoping that delivering the plants close to the intended location will be sufficient. Choice number 2, plant the new flowers between the weeds, hoping that the nutrients in the soil will support both. Choice number 3, give the new plants a stern lecture about growing smarter and make wiser use of the available nutrients. And choice number 4, pull the weeds. Then and only then plant the flowers. Although the last choice may seem like nothing more than common sense, it is decidedly uncommon in schools. Every education system has weeds. There is not a school district, a school, a department, an office, a job description, or a program that does not have at least a few. If we fail to pull the weeds, we can anticipate conversations like these and see if any of these sound like something you've heard before. We will have professional learning communities just as soon as we finish making announcement at the faculty meeting. We'll do common scoring of student work just as soon as all members of the teaching team finish their parent-teacher conferences and their reports. And we're happy to embrace writing across the curriculum just as soon as we finish covering a curriculum that has never yet been completed within the school year. So he says, fortunately, there is an answer to this initiative fatigue, and that is the common sense of the gardener. The strategic leader must have a garden party to pull the weeds before planting the flowers. What a great sentiment. We need that in every school. Oh, there's 2 things we need in every school. Couple of warnings that Douglas Reeves gives us about pulling the weeds is that sometimes one person's weed is another person's flower. So we can't just go randomly, ripping everything out of the school. Let's pull out this initiative. Let's stop doing this. Let's stop doing that. So we'd have to tread a bit carefully. The second is that if leaders will not pull the school-wide weeds in meetings, conferences and interruptions, they can hardly ask teachers to weed the classroom garden. So the weeding needs to start with us as the leadership team. So there's my 3 hot quotes on prioritising, and they need to be our mantras. So the last 2 phases of the FISO improvement cycle, we're not going to go into these in depth because we need to be putting our attention in those first 2 phases. So develop and plan, got to think about what will success in our school look like in 4 years? What will our teachers, our students and our parents be doing differently in 4 years' time if we are successful in this numeracy change? And let's backwards plan from there. Which bite of the elephant will we take next year? What are we trying to achieve in just 1 year? I've quoted Mr. Scout on this. Mr. Scout was one of my teachers in primary school, and he used to say this all the time. He used to say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I'm pretty sure someone else said it, but I've quoted Mr. Scout as saying it. And he's absolutely right. I thought at the time I didn't know what he was on about, but now I do know what he was talking about, and I absolutely agree with him. We have to plan strategically for this change. We can't just kind of launch into it and then just hope that it becomes embedded and sustained. So thanks, Mr. Scown, for those wise words all those years ago. He also told me to put sunscreen on. I'm still getting my head around that one. The last one, implement and monitor. We can start the change, but we have to start thinking with a monitoring mindset. So when we start, we've got to be saying, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to know that this change is effective? How are we going to know if it's embedded and sustained? So we have to model best practice. We expect our teachers to plan, teach, assess, plan, teach, assess. When we're implementing change, we need to do exactly the same thing. So we've got to be assessing, planning, or implementing. Assessing, planning, implementing. Wise words from Franklin Roosevelt. He says, do something. If that works, do more. And if it doesn't, do something else. So I would just like you to, when you do something, let's go back to the start, make sure it's do the right thing right from the start, then we're not wasting everyone's time. Just to finish off, the resources and next steps, dig out your copy of the School Leader's Guide to Improving Literacy and Numeracy Outcomes. Just find it, you can just Google it, there's a PDF downloadable version. Head along to the Bastow's numeracy site and find out what's on offer and work out if any of those options will be useful for your staff. If you know me well, you know I love books and I love recommending books to people. These are the 3 books that I recommend to carry on the learning from tonight. The first one is the book that Mike Schmoker's book, Leading with Focus. It's a short read, but really helps us to think about what's important in schools. The second one, I haven't actually referred to this during the night, but they talk through leading effective numeracy change in schools and provide examples of schools that have done that. It's called Small Steps, Big Changes. And then the final one is the Douglas Reeves book. If you're just after that first chapter, though, you can just go online and find it. So there's the 3 books. You will get a copy of the slides from tonight. So if you didn't get those down in time, never fear. Just to finish off, this is the success criteria for tonight. I can identify the current state priorities. I can list some of the numeracy-related PL. I can discuss the role of the numeracy leader, and I can articulate some evidence-based strategies for leading effective change. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Look forward to seeing the numeracy leaders in the next webinar, so look out for the dates for that. So thanks very much, everyone, and good night.